Three alien sisters mocked the human until the king ordered them to marry him. The grand hall of the celestial palace on Astoria Prime buzzed with tension as King Mavrus Valorian III raised his hand for silence. The assembled nobles, diplomats, and royal court members fell quiet, their attention fixed on the imposing figure seated upon the crystalline throne. The king's silver-white hair and angular features marked him as one of the Astorian race, his deep purple eyes scanning the gathered crowd with regal authority. Standing before the throne, Commander James Sterling maintained his military bearing despite the whispers and subtle sneers from the king's 6 daughters arranged to his left. The human warrior's dark combat armor, accented with dull gold trim, marked him as an elite member of the Terran Defense Force. His neatly trimmed brown beard and styled hair gave him a distinguished appearance that contrasted sharply with the exotic beauty of the alien princesses. The 3 youngest princesses, Kata, Vera, and Nova, had been particularly vocal in their disdain for the human commander. Their mockery of his primitive species had become increasingly bold over the past months, despite his diplomatic mission to strengthen ties between Earth and Astoria Prime. "My people," King Mavrus began, his voice resonating through the chamber. "For centuries, the Astorian Empire has prided itself on wisdom and enlightenment. Yet I find myself troubled by the growing arrogance I witness in my own house." The 3 younger princesses shifted uncomfortably, their different colored skin tones, emerald, sapphire, and amethyst, seeming to shimmer in the ethereal light of the hall. "Therefore, I decree that my daughters Kata, Vera, and Nova shall wed Commander James Sterling of Earth, binding our peoples together and teaching the value of humility through service." Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the hall. The 3 princesses' faces contorted in shock and outrage, their long black hair seeming to bristle with indignation. "Father, you cannot be serious." Princess Kata, the green-skinned beauty, stepped forward. Her dark metallic dress rustled as she moved. "To wed a human?" Sterling kept his expression neutral, though a slight smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. The irony wasn't lost on him. These same women who'd spent months ridiculing him would now be bound to him by royal decree. "I am entirely serious, daughter," King Mavrus replied, his tone brooking no argument. "For 1 year, you 3 shall be wed to Commander Sterling. If after that time you truly wish to dissolve the union, you may return home. However, I suspect you might learn more than you expect from this arrangement." Princess Vera, her blue skin flushed a deeper azure with anger, stepped beside her sister. "This is absurd. We are Astorian royalty. How can you expect us to—" "Enough!" The king's voice cracked like thunder. "Your prejudice and pride shame our house. Commander Sterling has shown nothing but honor and dignity in the face of your constant derision. Perhaps experiencing life as his wives will teach you the respect you so sorely lack." The violet-skinned Princess Nova remained silent, her dark eyes studying Sterling with a calculating gaze that made him wonder what thoughts churned behind that beautiful face. Sterling finally spoke, his deep voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Your Majesty, while I'm honored by your unique solution, are you certain this is wise?" The king's lips curved in a knowing smile. "Commander, you've proven yourself a man of integrity and strength. I trust you'll treat my daughters with the respect they've yet to show you. Perhaps in time they'll learn to reciprocate." Sterling bowed slightly. "As you wish, Your Majesty." He turned to face his soon-to-be wives, noting their varying expressions of shock, anger, and, in Nova's case, intrigue. "My ladies, shall we discuss our upcoming nuptials?" Kata's emerald face darkened. "This is preposterous. I won't—" "You will," King Mavrus interrupted. "The ceremony will take place tomorrow at dawn. I suggest you all use this time to begin adjusting to your new reality." As the court erupted in excited chatter, Sterling watched his future wives storm from the hall, their metallic dresses catching the light. He couldn't help but chuckle at the situation. From diplomatic envoy to royal consort in one decree, her life certainly had a sense of humor. Nova paused at the door, glancing back at him with an unreadable expression before following her sisters. Sterling had a feeling she, at least, might prove interesting company in the months ahead. The morning after King Mavrus's shocking decree, Commander James Sterling found himself in his newly assigned quarters within the Celestial Palace's East Wing. The spacious chambers, decorated in a blend of Astorian crystal architecture and Terran military functionality, would serve as home for him and his 3 reluctant brides. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Princess Kita declared, pacing the common area like a caged predator. Her emerald skin seemed to pulse with barely contained fury. "I refuse to participate in this farce." Sterling lounged in a crystalline chair, deliberately projecting an air of casual amusement. "Your father's orders seemed quite clear, Princess. Unless you're planning to defy the king? Don't you dare speak to me of my father." Keta whirled on him, her black hair flowing like liquid shadow. "You may have fooled him with your diplomatic act, but I know what humans are really like. Primitive, aggressive, driven by base desires." "Fascinating assessment," Sterling replied dryly. "And how many humans have you actually known, Your Highness?" The question caught her off guard. Her mouth opened, then closed without response. "As I thought." He stood approaching her with measured steps. "You judge an entire species based on propaganda and prejudice. Not very enlightened for an Astorian royal, is it?" Vera, who had been sulking by the panoramic window, turned to face them. Her sapphire skin caught the morning light, creating mesmerizing patterns. "We've seen the historical records of your wars, your violence. You can't deny humanity's barbaric nature." Sterling laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Barbaric? Your own history speaks of the Crimson Purge, when Astorian nobles used crystalline weapons to decimate rival houses. Every species has its dark chapters, Princess. The question is whether we learn from them." Nova, who had remained quietly observant until now, spoke from her position on a curved sofa. "He makes a valid point, sisters." Her violet skin seemed to shimmer as she shifted position, the movement deliberately sensual. "Perhaps we should approach this situation with more scientific curiosity." "Scientific curiosity," Keta scoffed. "What's there to study about humans? They're fascinating creatures," Nova interrupted, her dark eyes fixed on Sterling. "Their shorter lifespans drive them to accomplish more in decades than we do in centuries. Their adaptability is remarkable, and their capacity for both destruction and creation is intriguing." Sterling met her gaze, recognizing the calculating intelligence behind her words. "High praise from an Astorian princess. Though I notice you're still talking about us like we're specimens in a lab." Nova's lips curved in a subtle smile. "Would you prefer I study you more personally, Commander?" The suggestive tone made Keta bristle. "Nova, don't encourage him." "Why not?" Nova rose gracefully, approaching Sterling. "Father's decree is law. We're bound to this human for a year. I, for one, intend to make the experience educational." Vera moved away from the window, her expression troubled. "You can't seriously be considering intimacy with him?" "And if I am?" Nova circled Sterling slowly, her movements predatory. "Our bodies are compatible. Humans are known for their passionate nature. And unlike you two, I've always found their primitive vigor somewhat appealing." Sterling maintained his composure, though he couldn't help appreciating Nova's bold approach. "I'm standing right here, Your Highness." "Oh, I'm very aware, Commander." Nova stopped in front of him, close enough that he could smell her exotic perfume. "And please, call me Nova. We are to be married after all." Kita made a disgusted sound. "This is absurd. I won't stand here and watch my sister debase herself with a human." "Then don't watch," Nova replied without looking away from Sterling. "But remember Father's words about humility and respect. Your prejudice blinds you to potentially valuable experiences." Sterling decided to take control of the situation. "Ladies, while I appreciate the varied perspectives on our arrangement, perhaps we should establish some ground rules for our year together." "What kind of rules?" Vera asked suspiciously. "First, no more species-based insults. We're all intelligent beings capable of civil discourse." He looked at each princess in turn. "Second, while this marriage may be politically motivated, I expect basic courtesy from all of you. The same courtesy I'll show you." Kita crossed her arms. "And if we refuse?" Sterling's smile held a hint of steel. "Then I'll make sure your father knows exactly how his daughters are representing the enlightened Astorian Empire. I'm sure he'd be fascinated by your continued prejudice, despite his direct orders." "You would dare threaten us?" Kita's voice rose. Not a threat, princess. A promise of honesty, something your people claim to value. Nova laughed softly. He outmaneuvers us at every turn, sisters. Perhaps there's more to humans than we assumed. There's certainly more to this one, Vera admitted reluctantly, studying Sterling with new interest. Though I still don't like this situation. You don't have to like it, Sterling replied, but you do have to live it. For 1 year. After that, you're free to return to your prejudices if you choose. But I suggest keeping an open mind. You might be surprised by what you learn. Nova moved even closer, her body nearly touching his. Oh, I intend to learn everything I can, Commander. Everything. The tension in the room shifted from hostile to something more complex. Even Kata and Vera seemed affected by their sister's bold flirtation, their expressions showing confusion and perhaps a hint of curiosity. Sterling maintained his professional demeanor, though his pulse quickened at Nova's proximity. This year would certainly test his diplomatic skills, among other things. Well then, he said, stepping back slightly. Shall we discuss the wedding ceremony? I believe your father mentioned something about dawn tomorrow. The traditional Asterian wedding ceremony took place in the Crystal Cathedral, its towering spires catching the first rays of dawn. The vast chamber was filled with nobles, diplomats, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness this unprecedented union between a human commander and 3 Asterian princesses. Sterling stood before the crystalline altar, his dark formal uniform adorned with both Terran and Astorian symbols of office. The 3 princesses approached in traditional Astorian wedding attire, shimmering gowns that seemed to capture and reflect light in mesmerizing patterns. As the ancient rites proceeded, Sterling noticed subtle changes in his bride's demeanor. Kata's emerald features still held defiance, but there was something else there now, a flicker of curiosity when she thought he wasn't looking. Vera's sapphire skin seemed to pulse with nervous energy, her eyes darting between Sterling and the gathered crowd. And Nova, the violet-skinned princess, maintained direct eye contact throughout the ceremony, her gaze holding promises that made Sterling's pulse quicken. The ceremonial binding involved an exchange of energy between the 4 of them, facilitated by the crystal technology unique to Asterian culture. As their hands touched the ceremonial crystal, Sterling felt an unexpected surge of connection, not just physical, but emotional and mental as well. The binding reveals truth, the high priest intoned. What was hidden becomes known. Sterling suddenly understood. The ceremony wasn't just symbolic. The crystal technology was creating genuine bonds between them, allowing each to sense the other's surface thoughts and emotions. Kata's gasp confirmed she felt it too. Her initial shock gave way to fascination as she experienced Sterling's genuine respect for her people, his determination to make this arrangement work, and yes, his undeniable attraction to all 3 of them. Vera's resistance crumbled as she sensed Sterling's honest intentions. Her preconceptions about human primitives couldn't withstand the direct experience of his complex mind and passionate nature. Nova's smile grew wider as the connection deepened. Her own desires and curiosity merged with Sterling's, creating a feedback loop of attraction that threatened to overwhelm the ceremony's solemnity. After the formal rites concluded, the 4 newlyweds retired to their shared quarters, a luxurious suite that somehow managed to feel both spacious and intimate. The energy from the ceremony still hummed between them, making every glance and casual touch electric with possibility. Well, Sterling broke the charged silence. That was certainly more intense than I expected. The binding crystal revealed much, Nova purred, moving closer, including some very interesting thoughts about us, Commander. Kata, who had been examining the suite's layout, turned sharply. The ceremony was meant to create political bonds, not whatever this is. Was it? Vera questioned, her voice soft. Father knows our customs well. He must have known what the binding would do. Of course he did, Nova laughed. This was never just about teaching us humility. It was about forcing us to truly know our human husband and allowing him to know us. Sterling loosened his formal collar, suddenly very aware of 3 pairs of eyes tracking the movement. Your father is quite the strategist, though I doubt even he anticipated how compatible we'd be. Compatible? Kata scoffed, but her voice lacked its earlier venom. Just because we can sense each other's thoughts and feelings, Nova interrupted, moving to stand behind Sterling. Her hands traced his shoulders, making him acutely aware of her presence. Don't pretend you can't feel it, sister. The raw power in him, the passion, so different from our carefully controlled males. Vera stepped closer, drawn despite herself. It is fascinating. Humans feel everything so intensely. Every emotion, every sensation. The binding crystal's effects seemed to intensify with proximity. Sterling found himself flooded with their combined emotions. Kita's reluctant attraction warring with pride, Vera's scientific curiosity bleeding into desire, and Nova's open hunger for experience. This is inappropriate, Kita protested weakly, even as she moved closer to the group. By whose standards? Nova challenged. We're married now, all of us, and I, for one, intend to explore every aspect of this union. Sterling felt the shift in the room's energy, from tension to something far more primal. The binding crystal's influence had stripped away pretense, leaving only raw truth between them. Ladies, he said, his voice rough with restraint, perhaps we should discuss boundaries. Nova's laugh cut him off. We can sense your thoughts, husband. Your desire to respect us wars with your attraction. Your human nobility is admirable, but unnecessary. We are all willing participants now. Vera moved to Sterling's side, her scientific detachment giving way to curiosity. The binding reveals that humans experience pleasure differently than Astorians, more intensely. Everything about them is intense, Keta murmured, her resistance finally crumbling as she joined the group. Their emotions, their desires, their determination. Sterling felt surrounded by their presence, their unique sense mingling with the lingering energy of the binding crystal. Through their connection, he sensed their growing fascination with his human nature, their awakening desire to explore these new sensations. If we're going to do this, he managed, maintaining his last shred of control. We do it right. No regrets, no power plays, equal partners. Nova's fingers traced patterns on his neck. Always the diplomat. But yes, we agree. Don't we, sisters? The other two princesses nodded, their earlier prejudices forgotten in the face of this new reality. The binding crystal's influence had revealed truths they couldn't ignore. About Sterling, about themselves, and about the possibilities between them. What followed was a night of discovery, as four different beings learned to bridge the gaps between their species through touch, emotion, and shared pleasure. The binding crystal enhanced every sensation, allowing them to experience each other's feelings in a feedback loop of escalating intensity. Dawn found them tangled together in the massive royal bed, their bodies cooling in the morning air. Sterling marveled at how naturally they fit together, his human form complementing their alien beauty in ways he'd never imagined possible. Well, Kata said, her voice lacking any trace of its former disdain, perhaps Father's punishment wasn't quite what we expected. Vera laughed softly. Indeed, though I suspect he knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did, Nova purred, stretching languorously. He knew we needed to experience humanity directly to overcome our prejudices. Though I doubt even he anticipated quite how thoroughly we'd embrace the lesson. Sterling pulled them closer, feeling their contentment through the lingering bond. So still think humans are primitive barbarians? Oh no, Nova teased. Now we know you're sophisticated barbarians. Much more interesting. Their laughter filled the room, marking the beginning of what promised to be an extraordinary year together. The binding crystal had done more than just join them in marriage. It had created a bridge between their species that would change them all forever. The morning after their wedding night brought new discoveries as Sterling introduced his wives to various Earth customs, starting with a traditional human breakfast. The private dining room in their suite became a cultural classroom as he explained the significance of sharing meals in human society. On Earth, breakfast is often considered the most important meal of the day, Sterling said, demonstrating the use of various utensils. It's also traditionally a time for families to connect before facing daily challenges. Nova watched him with fascination, her violet skin gleaming in the morning light. Fascinating how humans place such importance on communal eating. Astorians typically take morning nutrients in solitude. Perhaps that's why humans form such strong emotional bonds, Vera observed, her scientific curiosity evident as she sampled each dish. These shared experiences create neural pathways that… Must you analyze everything? Keta interrupted, though her tone held more affection than criticism. The binding crystal's lingering effects had softened her sharp edges, replacing contempt with genuine interest. Sterling felt their combined emotions through their fading connection, a curiosity, contentment, and an undercurrent of desire that hadn't diminished since their wedding night. If anything, the morning light had intensified their awareness of each other. Speaking of human customs, Nova purred, setting aside her utensils. I've been researching Earth's marriage traditions, particularly the concept of a honeymoon. Sterling nearly choked on his coffee. Have you now? Oh yes, she smiled, her dark eyes sparkling. A period dedicated to cultural exchange between newlyweds. How fascinating that humans institutionalize such pleasure-seeking. Vera's sapphire skin darkened with interest. The physiological responses humans experience during intimate moments are remarkably intense. Last night's observations were quite enlightening. Sisters, Kata protested weakly, though her emerald features betrayed her own arousal. We're supposed to be learning about human culture. And what better way to learn? Nova stood, moving behind Sterling's chair. Her fingers traced patterns on his shoulders, sending shivers down his spine. Humans express themselves so beautifully through physical contact. Every touch tells a story. The binding crystal's influence might have faded, but their connection remained strong. Sterling felt their combined desire like a physical force, drawing them together despite any lingering reservations. Your father might not have anticipated this particular cultural exchange, he managed, his voice rough with restraint. Oh, I think he did, Vera said thoughtfully. Historian marriages are typically arranged for political purposes, with physical compatibility being secondary. But he chose you specifically, a human known for passion and intensity. Nova's hands continued their exploration. And now we understand why. Human emotional depth creates experiences unlike anything in Astrian culture. The way you feel everything so completely, so unreservedly. Keta rose from her seat, drawn into their orbit despite herself. It's true. Even now, hours after the binding ceremony, I can sense your desires. They're overwhelming. Sterling stood, turning to face his wives. Their beauty struck him anew. 3 distinct yet complementary beings, each bringing something unique to their union. Then perhaps we should continue our cultural exchange. After all, understanding comes through experience. What followed was an exploration of both human and Astrian pleasure customs, as 4 beings from different worlds discovered new ways to bridge their cultural gaps. Their passion built throughout the day, interrupted only by brief discussions of their respective traditions and customs. By evening, they lay tangled together on plush cushions in their private garden, watching twin moons rise over the crystal spires of the palace. The air was heavy with exotic flowers and satisfaction. I never understood before, Kata murmured, tracing patterns on Sterling's chest. Why humans embrace chaos and emotion so readily. But now you see that passion isn't primitive, Sterling finished. It's a force that drives us to create, to explore, to connect, to love, Nova added softly, surprising them all. That's what makes humans truly remarkable. You feel everything so deeply, yet you never break. You bend, adapt, grow stronger. Vera propped herself up on an elbow, her scientific detachment completely gone. The binding crystal showed us your mind, your heart. How could we have ever thought humans inferior? Your species contains multitudes. Sterling pulled them closer, marveling at how naturally they fit together. And your species taught me that beauty comes in many forms, not just physical, but cultural, intellectual, spiritual. Always the diplomat, Nova teased, though her voice held genuine affection. Though I must admit, your diplomatic skills have proven quite impressive. Their laughter filled the garden, a harmony of human and Astorian joy. As night fell, they retired to their chambers, where cultural exchange continued well into the early hours. 2 weeks after the wedding, King Mavrus summoned all 4 of them to his private study. The chamber, lined with ancient crystal archives and holographic star maps, reflected the monarch's dual nature as both ruler and scholar. My daughters, he began, his purple eyes twinkling with amusement, and my new son-in-law, I trust your cultural exchange has been enlightening? Nova's violet skin darkened slightly, while Vera suddenly found the star maps fascinating. Keta maintained her composure, though her emerald features couldn't hide her flush. Sterling, drawing on his diplomatic training, simply nodded respectfully. "Indeed, Your Majesty. We've learned much from each other." "Excellent," the king smiled. "Then perhaps you're ready for a true test of your newfound unity. The Centaurian delegation arrives tomorrow, seeking to renegotiate our trade agreements. They're notorious for exploiting any sign of weakness or discord." "And you want us to handle the negotiations?" Kita asked, her political instincts engaging. "Precisely. The Centaurians must see that our alliance with Earth, symbolized by your marriage, is strong and genuine. Show them the strength that comes from true partnership." As they left the king's study, Nova suddenly swayed. Sterling caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" "I dot." Nova pressed a hand to her abdomen, her eyes widening. "The palace physician mentioned something unusual in my morning scan, but I didn't think—" Vera's scientific training kicked in immediately. She pulled out a personal scanner, running it over her sister. The holographic display showed complex data streams that made Sterling's head spin. "By the crystal spires," Vera breathed. "Nova, you're carrying a child, a hybrid child." The revelation hit them all like a gravitational wave. Sterling felt his heart skip several beats as he processed the implications. Nova's violet skin seemed to glow with an inner light as she placed both hands on her stomach. "Impossible," Kata whispered. "Human Astorian hybridization was theoretically possible, but never attempted?" Nova laughed softly. "Well, we certainly attempted it thoroughly enough." Sterling pulled Nova close, overwhelmed by emotion. Through their fading binding link, he felt her joy, her excitement, and yes, her slight apprehension. "Are you okay with this?" "Okay?" Nova turned in his arms, her dark eyes shining. "My love, I'm carrying the first human Astorian child in history, a being born of passion rather than political calculation. I'm more than okay." Vera continued scanning, her scientific enthusiasm barely contained. "The genetic integration is remarkable. The binding crystal must have facilitated compatibility at the cellular level. This changes everything we thought we knew about cross-species reproduction." "It certainly explains why you've been so energetic lately," Kata observed with a knowing smirk. "Even more than usual." Nova's response was to pull Sterling into a passionate kiss, ignoring their public location. Through their connection, her heightened desires flooded into him, making his head spin. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private," Sterling suggested, his voice rough. "The Centaurian negotiations." Kata began, but her protest lacked conviction. "Are tomorrow," Vera finished, her own breathing quickened by the waves of desire flowing through their bond. "Tonight, we celebrate." They barely made it back to their chambers before passion overwhelmed them. The news of Nova's pregnancy seemed to intensify their connection, making every touch electric with possibility. Their lovemaking took on new meaning, no longer just pleasure and cultural exchange, but the creation of something unprecedented. Hours later, as they lay tangled in silk sheets, Vera propped herself up on an elbow. "You realize this proves everything we once thought about humans was wrong? Your species isn't primitive. You're evolutionarily advanced enough to bridge genetic gaps we thought insurmountable." Sterling chuckled, running his fingers through Nova's hair as she dozed contentedly against his chest. "Or maybe love is just more powerful than scientific assumptions." "Both, perhaps," Nketa suggested, her earlier political concerns forgotten in the afterglow. "Human passion combined with Astorian adaptation. Our child will be extraordinary." "Our child," Nova murmured sleepily. "All of ours. That's the human way, isn't it? Family isn't just about blood." Sterling felt his heart swell. These women who had once mocked him now understood humanity's greatest strength, our capacity for love in all its forms. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll show the Centaurians what that strength looks like. A unified family, bridging worlds, creating new possibilities. They won't know what hit them." Kata grinned, her diplomatic mind already plotting strategies. "Especially when they realize they're dealing with a pregnant Astorian princess," Vera added. "Our people become rather intense when protecting new life." Nova's hand found Sterling's, guiding it to her stomach. "And humans become rather formidable when protecting family." "Don't they, my love?" Sterling's answering kiss left no doubt about that truth. The night deepened around them as they celebrated their joy, their passion igniting again and again until dawn approached. The Centaurian delegation arrived in a display of cold efficiency, their crystalline ships casting prismatic shadows across the palace landing pad. Sterling stood with his wives, noting how Nova's violet skin seemed to glow with an inner radiance, her pregnancy progressing at an accelerated rate typical of Astorian gestation. "Remember," Kata whispered, her emerald features set in diplomatic neutrality, "Centaurians respect strength above all else." "Then they're in for quite a surprise," Sterling replied, feeling the warm pulse of desire through their lingering bond as Nova pressed against his side. The Centaurian ambassador, a tall being of living crystal named Prism Shard 7, approached with mechanical precision. "We come seeking profitable discourse." "And you shall have it," Vera responded, her scientific background lending authority to her words. "Though perhaps not the kind you expect." The negotiations began in the crystal chamber, where the Centaurians immediately tried to establish dominance through aggressive trading positions. Their strategy might have worked if they weren't facing a uniquely bonded family. Sterling felt Nova's hand brush his thigh under the table, sending a jolt of pleasure through their connection. The surge of desire actually strengthened his focus, making his diplomatic responses sharper, more confident. "Your terms are unacceptable," he stated firmly, watching the crystalline beings vibrate with surprise at his directness. "The Astorian-Earth Alliance offers far more valuable opportunities." Kida picked up his thread seamlessly, her previous mockery of humans transformed into deep appreciation for their strategic thinking. "Our combined technologies have already produced unprecedented advances." "Indeed," Vera added, her fingers trailing along Sterling's arm as she spoke. "The fusion of human innovation with Astorian crystal science has created possibilities previously thought impossible." Nova's pregnancy was living proof of that fact, though they kept that revelation private for now. Her accelerated condition meant she was already showing slight signs, her violet skin stretching beautifully over their growing child. The Centaurians conferred in their clicking language, clearly unsettled by the obvious intimacy between the human and his Astorian wives. Their society valued cold logic and separation of function. This display of unified passion challenged their worldview. "We fail to comprehend," Prism Shard 7 finally stated. "How can such emotional beings produce reliable results?" Sterling smiled, feeling his wives' amusement through their bond. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order." At his signal, Vera activated a holographic display showing the latest achievements of human-Astorian cooperation. Each innovation was more impressive than the last, but it was the underlying message that struck home. Passion drove progress. Throughout the presentation, the sisters took turns subtly touching Sterling, their desire flowing through their connection and enhancing his natural confidence. The Centaurians watched in fascination as their unified energy filled the room with palpable power. "Your emotional bonds," Prism Shard 7 observed. "They strengthen rather than weaken you." "Humanity's greatest power," Nova explained, her hand resting protectively over her growing child, "is their ability to transform emotion into action, love into creation, passion into progress." The negotiations continued into the evening, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Centaurians, faced with such obvious proof of a human Astorian success, had no choice but to accept more balanced terms. As the delegation departed, Sterling felt Nova's urgent need through their bond. Her pregnancy hormones had intensified her already passionate nature, and the day's power play had only heightened her desire. "Husband," she purred, pressing against him as soon as they reached their private chambers. "I believe we should celebrate our diplomatic victory." Kata and Vera moved to join them, their own desires awakened by Nova's broadcast emotions. The binding crystal's lingering effects meant they all shared in her heightened sensitivity. What followed was a celebration of life, love, and victory, their passion echoing through their private wing of the palace until dawn. Nova's pregnancy seemed to enhance every sensation, her joy in their growing child adding new depth to their intimate connections. Later, as they lay together, watching the twin moons rise, Sterling marveled at how completely his life had changed. These women who once mocked him now shared his bed, his heart, and his future. "I can feel the baby moving," Nova murmured, guiding his hand to her slightly rounded belly. "He's strong like his father." "He'll be extraordinary," Vera predicted, her scientific mind already contemplating the possibilities. "The first of a new species, born of love rather than laboratory work. And he'll have 3 mothers and a father to guide him," Kat added, her political concerns giving way to family loyalty. Our little diplomat. Sterling pulled them closer, feeling their combined contentment through their bond. From mockery to marriage to motherhood, he teased. Quite a journey. And it's only just beginning, Nova replied, initiating another round of passionate celebration that lasted well into the night. 3 months after the Centaurian negotiations, the Crystal Palace hummed with anticipation. Nova's accelerated pregnancy had transformed her violet skin into a luminescent masterpiece. Through their lingering bond, Sterling and her sister shared every moment of joy, creating an intimacy that transcended their arranged beginnings. Sterling watched his wives prepare their private chambers for the imminent arrival. Vera's scientific precision had crafted a perfect fusion of human comfort and Astorian medical technology, while her own sapphire skin seemed to pulse with unusual energy. Kata's diplomatic skills kept curious courtiers at bay, though her emerald features betrayed an inner glow that matched her sister's. The birthing crystals are aligned perfectly, Vera announced, her touch lingering on Sterling's arm longer than necessary. Though I must admit, human methods of creation are far more entertaining than our traditional approaches. Nova laughed from her position on the birthing couch, then gasped as another contraction hit. Speaking of entertainment, she reached for Sterling, drawing strength from his presence. Our little one seems eager to join the celebration. The labor progressed with typical Astorian speed, yet something felt different. The energy in the room crackled with unprecedented intensity, as if multiple forces were aligning simultaneously. I never imagined, Kata murmured, pressing against Sterling's back, that human passion could create such powerful changes in all of us. Vera's scientific detachment had long since melted into pure sensation. The combination of human virility with Astorian adaptation, it's revolutionary. We're experiencing something entirely new. Their intimate moment crystallized as Nova cried out, not in pain, but in triumph. The birth itself was accompanied by a burst of rainbow energy that filled the chamber with prismatic light. When it faded, Sterling held his son, a perfect fusion of human and Astorian features, with skin that shifted between violet and tan. He's magnificent, Nova breathed, reaching for their child, our miracle made flesh. As Sterling placed the baby in her arms, the wave of love through their bond nearly overwhelmed him. Not just from Nova, but from all 3 wives, each radiating a unique frequency of joy and something else. I'm staying, Kata announced, her hand resting protectively over her own abdomen. When the year ends, we're all staying. How could we leave? Vera added, her scientific precision giving way to pure emotion as she touched her midsection. This is just the beginning of our greatest experiment. Sterling's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Through their bond, he felt it. 3 distinct new lives, each pulsing with combined human and Astorian energy. You're all, he began amazed. Nova laughed, cradling their firstborn. Did you think Astorian women wouldn't adapt to human fertility? Our bodies are quite enthusiastic about compatibility. The binding crystal, Vera explained, her scientific nature emerging briefly. It didn't just facilitate one successful joining. It permanently altered our biology to accept human genetics. Every passionate moment since then has been productive. Kata's diplomatic reserve crumbled as she pressed against Sterling. And there have been many, many such moments. The passion that followed over the next days and weeks was tempered only by their devotion to their newborn son and the growing evidence of new life within the other sisters. The binding crystal's influence had faded, but their connection had grown stronger through choice and love. 1 month after the first birth, King Mavrus summoned them to his private gardens. The baby, named Alexander, gurgled happily in Nova's arms, while his aunts-turned-mothers practically glowed with their own impending joy. My children, the king said, his eyes twinkling with knowing wisdom. I see my experiment in teaching humility has yielded unexpected multiplicities. More than you could have imagined, Father, Nova replied, leaning into Sterling's embrace. Perhaps not, the king smiled, gesturing to his other daughter's obvious conditions. I had hoped you would learn to respect humans, that you might grow to love your husband. But this, he indicated their obvious happiness and growing family. This exceeds even my greatest expectations. We were such fools, Kata admitted, her hand finding Sterling's while the other cradled her growing secret. To mock what we didn't understand. The greatest wisdom often comes from embracing what we once feared, the king replied. Now about your year's trial period. We're staying, all three sisters said in unison, causing Sterling to laugh. All of us, Vera added, her scientific precision giving way to pure emotion. We've discovered something too precious to abandon. The celebration that followed was legendary. The three princesses who had once mocked humanity now stood proudly beside their human husband, their love and their conditions, evident to all who witnessed it. Later, in their private chambers, surrounded by crystal light, Sterling held his son while his wives curled around him, each radiating the unique energy of new life. To think, Nova mused, it all began with a father's lesson in humility and ended with a lesson in love, Sterling finished, feeling their combined happiness through their permanent bond. ×4, apparently. The crystal's gift, Vera murmured sleepily. Perfect biological adaptation. Human stamina, Kira added with a satisfied smile. Perfect passionate dedication. As the twin moons rose over the crystal palace, the family settled into their expanding reality, one where mockery had transformed into devotion, arranged marriage into true love, and cultural differences into strengths. Their story would be told for generations as a proof that love could bridge any gap, transform any heart, and create not just one miracle, but many,